everyone, Steve Elliott here again with a watercolour painting in Procreate. Bit excited about this one because I'm importing my own textured paper that I created by photographing a copy of Archer's watercolour paper, importing that in. You can see that happening now. I'm just importing it in from the files folder. Once I get it in, I put that at the top of my stack pile and I set the blend mode to linear burn, and then I lock the layer. Once I've done that, that's pretty much it. Really excited about this because creating my own texture, I was able to make it really large, so the actual texture is real size compared to the painting I'm doing, which is 16 by 24. The colour palette I'm using, which I'm just setting up now, is called Watercolour, and those are the colours that I actually use in this painting. Limited palette again. I never use a lot of colours, I just use a few selected ones and I stick with them. I don't start dipping into other colours off the colour circle. Unlike the oil paintings that you may have seen me do, I don't just crash a colour over the old canvas. That's because watercolour papers are translucent, they do show through. So I begin with a local wash over the whole of the paper. Now you'll see I started again. I didn't like the first one. I thought it all looked a little bit insipid. So I began again, and I'm excited again because I'm using two new brushes that I've created myself for these nice soft colours, or soft tones I should say, that I've got in the sky and on the buildings. They were a little bit limiting, I found, with the brushes. I was kind of hoping that I could sort of shrink them down and not keep changing, but that's not so. They were really great for the soft colours. Then after that, I had to revert back to the default watercolour brushes, but that was okay because they served the purpose that they was meant for. You can see the texture of the paper there on the painting, so loving that. That looks so realistic. And I've got the initial wash on, and I'm now adding some a bit more detailed work. Starting on the buildings or the church, you'll notice that the sketch I do always do a preliminary sketch with watercolour. You'll again, if you've watched my videos, you'll know if I'm doing oil paintings, I don't bother sketching, I just get straight in with the paint. But I've been painting watercolours for so long, and I always feel like the pencil work is a part of the painting, and I don't erase it. I let that stay on the painting. So I do sketch out the basic outlines of all the buildings and things before I start painting in watercolour. Very different to when I'm doing an oil painting. And you can see I'm sort of putting in colour and then softening it off all the time. That's exactly how I would be working in watercolour. The photograph I want to talk about in the bottom left corner, when I zoom out, you'll notice that I only have two trees on my painting. I've removed the centre one because that just blocks you getting into the painting. And I've moved the foreground bench. That's not in my painting either. So the two trees that I do have make a nice frame around the whole of the painting, which I'm very pleased with. Using that limited palette, I was working with two colours to start with, really. The soft, creamy ochre colours and the blue, the teal. And I got quite a way into it just using those. And then I introduced the purples a bit later on. I thought I needed to add a third colour into that. I'm glad I did. I think that adds a nice balance to it. Another thing I've done in this painting that I don't do in the oil paintings, I'm working on a lot more layers, and I created right at the beginning a layer called highlights, and I set that to add, I believe, and then I created another layer called lows, and I set that blending mode to multiply. So when I was working in dark colours, I went into after the initial wash, I went into the low colour layer to painting that, and then I added highlights using the highlighted layer with the add colour selected. You can see it there. I used it just to lift out some of the colour in the top of the roof. All the trees I put on different layers so it didn't disturb the buildings that were underneath them on a different layer. That was really cool, very similar to how I would work in watercolour. Another nice thing is here, look, I can work behind the trees and not damage them at all. You can't do that in conventional painting. And I found myself doing that a lot. There you can see I'm using the highlighted layer with a white colour just to lift out sort of highlights on the architecture of the building where the windowsills are sticking out proud and one or two other things. Added a darker colour on the end building just to make the church sit forward. I didn't worry too much about the detail on the tower or steeple, I don't know what you'd really call that, because I knew that a lot of it was going to get obscured by the trees. And you'll notice I put in a little bit of detail on the windows, again on the highlighted layer, lifting out the colour. It's just the same as using a wet brush on conventional paint and just softening off the colour and then dabbing it out with a bit of rag or something. Going into the trees now, I tried to, although the tone of the colour is darker, to sort of bring it forward, I didn't want it to go too dark. I didn't want to silhouette the trees. I wanted you to see the detail and the form of the trees and the shape of the trunk and so on. So I did keep it quite light coloured with a darker tone at the edge of the tree to sort of give you the impression that it was round. And the thing that drew me to paint this was, as I was walking past, the leaves were falling out of the trees and they were the last few leaves of the year, really, the remnants that were still hanging on there in the branches, and a gust of wind came along and blew them out. So that's what inspired me to do this painting, and you'll see I've got a few leaves in the trees there, and I will add some more blowing in the breeze or the gust of wind as the painting progresses. One thing about painting trees, I should say, now I'm very guilty of this, and I've seen a lot of painters make the same mistake. They paint the trunks way too thin, and I started off with this one really where they're quite thin, and I had to thicken them up because they just wouldn't support themselves if they're too thin, and so they look false. They just don't look right. So I definitely have to consciously make sure I thicken up those branches and trunks as I'm going, just to make sure they do look like they can hold the weight of the tree. I'm putting some of the colour of the sky in the trees there, and the same colour that I'm using in the windows. And it all adds to a balance across the whole painting that makes the thing look as though it is a painting and not separate elements just placed on a canvas somewhere. It just ties it all together. So I'm thinking now I need to do something with the foreground, and I try one or two things with different blend modes and just to try and get an effect, because I do have an habit of making foregrounds sludgy looking and just not nice. But in the end I settled with a regular layer, no blending modes added at all, and I added some really strong colour, as you can see, and then I used the smudge tool to knock that all back and sort of just soften it all out. And that's basically what I would be doing with a pot of water and a brush, just soften it out. So yeah, it all came together quite nice. So now I've definitely got the trees in the foreground, but you can see they're not silhouetted. They've got plenty of colour in them and shape, and I've added a few more leaves. They were the ones that were blowing about in the wind. Go into the second tree and add some more branches, darkening them up a little bit near the top. Add in a warmer colour to pick out the colour of the leaves that I've added to the foreground. Put in a few details in the trees. I don't go crazy with detail. I started to get a bit mad here and put in loads of branches, and then I took them out again. I thought, well, it's way too much. You see what I mean now about the church spire or steeple? I didn't need to go mad with detail on that. Two reasons. One, I knew I was going to cover it with the two trees, and I couldn't really see it anyway on the original photo, so I was sort of guessing. I go in and put in the third tree, which you can just see on the left side of the photograph. It's almost out of shot. And I put that in, then I soften it off a bit because I didn't want it to be quite as bold as the other two trees. It's not a main feature of the painting. It's at the edge of the painting, so I wanted that to not have your eye drawn to it. So I paint it in and then look at it and think, yeah, that needs knocking back a bit. And there you go. Look, I start to soften it off with the smudge tool and just push those colours out of it. What is really nice about this, I've done with this, and I've never ever done this before in a painting ever, is I was painting the foreground and then going back after into the background, if you like. And I started adding more detail to the church. After, for example, this guy that I put in now in the foreground, I paint him in. That would have been almost the last thing I would paint if I was doing this in a traditional way. But I just felt like putting that in there now. So I did. And I think I'm going to start working on this other group of people here. I put them in quite dark, the same sort of tones as I did with the first guy I painted. And then I look back and I did actually go in with a more of a blue colour. But I did feel that they were too strong, your eyes were drawn to them. So I just softened them off a bit. It's just little things like that that make sure that your painting is nice and balanced. And then this is cool because this is the bit I think where I go back in and start painting in the background behind the trees that I'd already painted because they was on a different layer. So working out of order was weird, definitely very weird, but at the same time very cool because it wasn't something that I just forgot to paint it originally. I just didn't do it, and then I got so into the trees and stuff, I thought I'll do that in a minute, and eventually I did go in there and do that. I didn't put a lot of detail in or anything, but it was nice to be able to do that and not worry that I was going to damage the trees. Here I'm sort of getting close to the end, and I'm just going back over the church and looking and adding more detail. I'm using that highlighted layer again with a sort of very soft tint and just using it to lift out colour rather than paint, and I thought that worked really well. So that's it. Thanks for staying with me till the end. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, big thumbs up would help me out a lot. It's always appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing because I've got lots more paintings like this and I'd love to be sharing them with you guys. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.